7,000 feet above sea level, in the heart of Mexico, is the valley of Teotihuacán. This small mountain valley is located only 30 miles from Mexico City. The major problems faced by the farming population are a high percentage of hillside land with scanty soil and therefore of marginal agricultural value, erosion, limited water sources for irrigation, an erratic and insufficient rainfall, and winter frosts. In this film, we will show how the Teotihuacano attempts to solve these problems. The most important crops grown are maize, the staple food, consumed mainly as tortillas, beans, the primary source of protein in the diet, maguey, a cactus whose sap is fermented into a type of wine called pulque, and tuna, the fruit of the nopal cactus. The natural vegetation consists primarily of cactus, an indication of the aridity of the area. Today, approximately 35 to 40,000 people live in this valley. Most of them are peasant farmers cultivating small parcels of land for subsistence crops. There are still a few great haciendas, survivors of the 19th century landholding system. Most of the population reside in nucleated villages rather than on their farms as in the United States. These communities range in size from 100 to 2,500 people. San Juan Teotihuacan is the largest community and is the only one with urban characteristics. Here we have a plan of the Teotihuacán Valley and an inset map showing its location in the country of Mexico. The valley may be divided into the following major ecological divisions based on depth of soil, angle of slope, and water available for irrigation. Steep hillsides with nearly denuded slopes, which are used for pasture, gentle slopes with scanty soil are terraced for maguey, barley, and bean cultivation. The two alluvial plains, where deep, fertile soils provide optimum conditions for agriculture, are used for maize, wheat, alfalfa, and barley. A major distinction must be made between the alluvial plain of the upper valley, where permanent water is lacking, and the lower valley, where springs at San Juan provide an irrigation system with a permanent flow of water. In the alluvial plain of the upper valley, there are no permanent water resources. Barrancas, or seasonal streams, are dry most of the year. Torrential downpours during the summer rainy season may convert these dry barrancas into raging floods in a few minutes. Farmers in this part of the valley have built small masonry dams across the barrancas with portable wooden gates to regulate the water flow. The water is backed up and diverted by canal systems to the fields. Some fields on slopes are elaborately contoured to more evenly distribute the flow of water. Soil is hoed up into embankments around each field or section of a field to retain the water. Aniceto Martinez, a villager from San Francisco Mazapan, owns a few acres on the upper valley plain. After irrigating the land, he prepares it by plowing for planting beans. His compadre, or godfather of his son, drops the bean seeds one by one into the furrow. The beans are then covered up by a second plowing. Aniceto's wife brings a lunch of beans, tortillas, and pulque from the village at noon. For planting maize, a plant that requires abundant moisture, a special technique called al tubo is used. Aniceto cuts 2 leaves or pencas from a maguey plant and fashions them into a planting drill or tubo. In this system of planting, the plowshare cuts down into the ground. The seed is dropped into the conical tube and rolls down to the level of the humid subsoil exposed by the plow. After planting, the primary activity is cultivation, to control the growth of weeds and to loosen the soil to facilitate downward drainage of moisture. In cases of prolonged drought, further irrigation may be required. The result, if prolonged droughts do not occur, is an abundant maize crop, the primary objective of every farmer in the valley. The ears are plucked by hand from the stalks, and the stalks are piled up into shocks to be used for fodder. Erosion is another of the major problems in the valley. 2 types of erosion occur: gully erosion, which forms the numerous barrancas, and the more serious sheet erosion, which can denude entire hillsides of soil. Farmers attempt to check sheet erosion by planting maguey in rows parallel to the slopes or by building stone terraces. Walls are sometimes built across barrancas to trap the soil washing down them, and maize is often planted in the delta-like soil formation which accumulates behind the wall. The scanty soil on slopes poses special problems to farmers living in hillside villages like Ostutipac. Jose Aguilar is a small landowner with holdings on the slope of the hill. In narrow terraces or strips of land between the lines of maguey, he plants beans, which require less moisture than maize and thrive better in the shallow soil. Economically, the most important hillside cultivate, however, is the maguey, a variety of cactus that thrives even in areas of scanty soil and minimal ground moisture. It reproduces by runners, or hijos. These are transplanted when they reach this stage of growth. Approximately 8 to 10 years after transplanting, the maguey is ready for pruning, or as the Teotihuacano puts it, to be castrated. Here Jose demonstrates the technique. First, he cuts several outer leaves to make an opening to facilitate the removal of those in the center. After cutting down the central leaves, he extracts the pulpy heart, leaving a hollow cup or taza in the plant. A few months after castration, the maguey begins to secrete into the taza a sweet, watery liquid called agua miel, or honey water, which is extracted twice a day. Jose keeps a large rock over the taza opening to keep out rodents and opossums. Each plant produces 2 to 6 quarts of agua miel per day for several months before the plant dies. Jose extracts the agua miel by sucking it into a gourd. After removing the liquid, he must rasp the walls of the taza to stimulate the flow of agua miel. Jose transports his agua miel to the village brewery by burro. Later in the film, we will see a brewery in operation. Many of the house lots in the upper valley contain small nopal orchards. The nopal cactus produces a fruit called the tuna, which is harvested in the late summer. Ordinary tin cans attached to poles are used to pluck off the fruit. Because tunas are covered with hundreds of tiny hair-like spines, they must be handled with heavy gloves. After picking, the children sweep off the spines. They are using ankle protectors made from old oil tins. The tuna is extremely sweet and juicy. It is the only fruit of economic significance in the valley, being consumed locally and also shipped to the markets in Mexico City. At San Juan, in the lower valley, are located some 80 springs with a combined permanent flow of 150 gallons per second. The springs are a favorite spot for doing the family laundry. A complex canal system distributes the water for the irrigation of 9,000 acres of rich alluvial plain in the lower valley. Just below the springs, the water divides at a place called the Taza into 2 main canals, the San Jose Canal and the San Antonio Canal. The map shows the location of the springs, the Taza, and the 2 main canals. 16 villages and 6 haciendas use the water from this system and are organized into a single great community for the maintenance of the canal system and the distribution of the water. Near the springs, where natural soil humidity is high and water is more abundant, approximately 125 acres of land are used for one of the most intensive systems of farming in Mexico. Here, Andres Reyes from the village of Maquisco diverts some water into the canal surrounding his 2 quarter-acre fields. Each field is in the form of a long rectangle to facilitate scoop irrigation. Although he grows some maize, Andres devotes most of his land to vegetables, such as lettuce and coriander, onions, squash, or for flowers. The produce is sold primarily in Mexico City. Since the plots of land are extremely small, all work is done by hand and few tools are needed. Here you see Andres planting a second crop of onions. The narrow width of the field facilitates scoop irrigation. Andres' son can throw the water from the canals at each side of the field as far as the center. In order to extract the maximal possible production from the tiny field, Andres plants many crops first in small seed beds. Here he is planting lettuce. He is burying the seed with a sickle-shaped tool he has made from a length of concrete reinforcing rod, another example of the reuse of technology intended for other uses. Seed beds require frequent irrigations. One month after planting the lettuce, Andres and his brother-in-law remove the young plants from the seed bed and transplant them in the main field. The field is divided into a number of small strips, each containing crops in various stages of growth, and several crops are therefore produced each year. Following the transplanting, Andres irrigates the field. Further down the lower valley, the land is used mainly for the production of basic grains, such as maize and winter wheat, and for alfalfa. At Atlatongo, a series of small dams with water gates are built across the main canals. Secondary canals conduct the water to groups of adjacent fields. When water is to be diverted into a secondary canal for irrigation, sod blocks are used to close the gate. The water level behind the gate rises, and the water flows into the secondary canal to the fields. The cycle of preparation of the land, planting, cultivation, harvesting, and technique of irrigation is similar to that followed on the alluvial plain of the upper valley. The main difference between the two is the abundance of water here in the lower valley. The farmers are flooding their fields here at the end of August in preparation for planting of winter wheat. They have just harvested a maize crop grown during the summer. One of the major tasks in the maintenance of an irrigation system is that of cleaning the silt from the canals. The main canals are cleaned by cooperative work gangs from the villages sharing them. Secondary canals, as in this case, are cleaned by small groups of farmers who utilize the canal. In the valley today, only one of the great haciendas of the 19th century has survived the agrarian revolution of 1911, the Rancho Huixcaloco, located in the upper valley. The house of the owner contrasts sharply with the workers' huts built against its outer wall. The hacienda is a self-contained socio-economic unit, even possessing its own church. The three primary products of the hacienda are milk, grains, and pulque. Hacienda workers may be divided into two groups: permanent residents called acasillados and seasonal workers from nearby villages. The goats here are owned by the acasillados, who are permitted to graze them on the hacienda lands. The dairy cattle are the property of the hacienda owner. The herders and their sons are acasillados. They take the cows out to pasture each morning and bring them back to the courtyard for water at noon. Cattle fodder made of chopped up maguey pencas demonstrates another of the almost limitless uses of this plant. The hacienda's 70 Holsteins are milked twice a day. The milking crew belong to the second category of workers and reside in the nearby villages. Unlike most non-resident workers, however, they are organized in a milkman's union or sindicato and make the rounds of all the smaller dairy farms in the valley as well as the hacienda. They milk the cows, feed them alfalfa, and clean the stalls. The milk is shipped to Mexico City. Another activity of the hacienda is the production of grains, such as maize and barley, and alfalfa. Maize is the most important crop and is produced for export to Mexico City. The land is prepared with tractors, but harvesting is done by hand labor from the nearby villages. The activities of the hacienda are directed by a resident administrator, since the owner is an absentee landlord residing in the capital. The third activity of the hacienda is the production of pulque. The tlachiqueros, or maguey cultivators, are acasillados, or permanent residents. Twice a day they go out to the maguey fields and extract the agua miel. They are also responsible for the planting and castration of the plants. The agua miel is brought in by burro late in the morning and late in the afternoon and taken to the tinacal, or brewery. it is unloaded and carried inside, where the brewmaster, or mayordomo de tinacal, receives, weighs, and records each man's yield. The agua miel is then emptied into great wooden vats, partially filled with fermenting pulque. Each day, the pulque is poured into large barrels, which are rolled into trucks owned by the hacienda. Note the use of the maguey penca as a ramp for loading. The barrels of pulque are transported to the railway station for shipment to the pulquerias or bars of Mexico City. Great quantities of pulque are also consumed at local fiestas and dances. The Teotihuacán Valley, in terms of those geographic characteristics that affect human occupation, is a hard country. Like most hard countries, it requires skillful and experienced manipulation by the individual farmer and efficient organization of many farmers for successful exploitation. The result of the application of such experience and organization is an extraordinary productivity. The rich and colorful social and religious life of the people of this valley would not be possible without the surplus time and resources made possible by this extremely successful adjustment to their environment.